everyone. This is Annie from the Adoption Squad. Mary is taking the week off, but she'll be back soon to continue her story of reunion with her biological sister. I'm personally excited to hear this story because what I've been picking up on over the years of knowing Mary is just how connected she feels to this sister and how much gratification she's gotten out of making that connection. This week, I will be talking about the idea of connection and also its opposite, the sometimes unspeakable feelings of loss and grief that come with the territory of adoption, but also life in general. And I do say unspeakable because sometimes we don't have words for this. We don't know what it is to have this loss and grief. It's sort of just subterranean and part of our experience. Now, before you turn this off, because all of that sounds a little too heavy to deal with today, I should let you know that I'm calling this episode Lost and Found. So there's your spoiler. There is a ray of hope here. I'll begin with telling you why this topic has even come up. This past January, some of you know, I lost my adopted dad and my dear old hound dog, Jake, on the same day, and it left me feeling a little numb. Then in February, very recently, a colleague I've worked with daily for 7.5 years passed away unexpectedly, and really in a way I consider heartbreakingly tragic. This colleague's funeral was streamed online last weekend, and I attended it. The grief I had been storing up and left unexpressed from January started pouring out during that funeral, and my grief about losing this colleague poured out as well. I was listening to the many beautiful and funny stories from that man's life told by his family and friends, and it made me ache for them. It was clear how deeply connected he was to those who loved him. And naturally, over the past couple of days, my thoughts started turning to my own friendships and family connections and what they mean to me. But feelings of disconnectedness started taking over. I started feeling more disconnected than connected. And this is a feeling all too familiar from childhood and probably exacerbated by COVID. There was one thought in particular that somehow crept into my mind, and I guess I welcomed it, and I would define it as a wake-up call, and that was this. When I lost my biological mother, Mary, over 5 years ago, I lost the closest connection I had to any human being that I have ever felt. At the time, I knew I was grieving the loss of my mother, and I'm not going to say I didn't grieve her because I did, but I didn't grieve the loss of that living, breathing connection and how that can take the wind out of your sails until you realize it, which is kind of a new revelation for me. When I realized this, the past couple of years started making sense to me. I felt a little adrift. It was time to dig deeper and sift through our story again. It was time to think about how to grieve the loss of my connection to her, and hopefully it would help make her memory a living thing for me again too. So here's some background. As an adoptee raised in a home where dysfunction reigned and any kind of normal reaction to life's trials was often shamed, forming and sustaining connections to other human beings was really fraught with anxiety and self-doubt. I'm so glad I moved past that. But I had best friends in elementary school, but I was pretty fearful of being part of a group. A one-on-one connection was barely manageable. Expanding beyond that was really unthinkable. Naturally, because every human needs connections and I really needed them, I learned how to develop friendships as I grew up, and some of these friendships have now become what I feel will be lifelong. These friendships are cherished more than the friends probably know. All of this is to provide context for the search of my biological mother. And while I considered myself at the time of the search far along the pathway to healing the loss and disconnection that comes with adoption, I do admit that I really wanted a connection to her. I prepared myself for rejection, but at the very least, I told myself I just needed to know her story. Now, I've covered the search and finding of my bio mom in other episodes, but what I'm copping to here is the desire to bond. Would I have lived without it? Sure, but the story would be different. This is the story of how how it actually happened. And as I've said in the past, almost instantly we had a connection. And I think we even began to get so comfortable in it that we took it for granted. Um, I adore her for putting up with my many phone calls where I would blather on about the latest boyfriend or husband crisis. And she also seemed to enjoy hearing stories about work and what my friends and I were up to, really everything. She asked a lot of questions and got a lot of stories in return. And I always tried to be funny for her. Hearing her laugh was like music to my ears. I eventually moved closer to her and started seeing her more often. There were some challenges getting to know her, however. She would want to hear all about me, but didn't have too much to say about herself or her life unless I pushed her a little. There was one visit, though, where things started opening up. There was a trunk of old pictures that was at my brother's house, and for some reason, he brought them over to her. I guess she wanted to go through them. I asked to go through them with her. One of my brothers was there as well, and we both got to hear many stories that day, and she seemed to enjoy her walk down memory lane. It seemed very refreshing to her. I think this was about a year after her husband, a man who treated me as his own daughter, had passed away. And while she had always put on a happy face whenever somebody visited, it did start seeping through her smiling and pleasant veneer just how much she missed her soulmate. Um, on subsequent visits, things did begin to change for Mary. She never wanted me to do anything for her. Offers to shop or clean her house, no. But at one point during a phone conversation, she admitted she was running out of food and asked me to shop for her, which I jumped on and gladly did. I did start shopping more routinely for her. She let me do that. But then what worried me was that she declined to let me visit. Twice I called to say I was going to drop by, and twice she told me no. She just wasn't up for it. She denied that anything was wrong, and believe me, I asked in 1,000 different ways to try to get at why she wouldn't let me visit, as this was very much out of character. The third time she tried to decline a visit, I just could not take no for an answer. I gently reminded her with a slight twist of mild manipulation out of worry. I mean, I had learned from the master that I had moved over 600 miles in part to be closer to her, and that I was frankly concerned. She then told me that she just wasn't able to keep up with the housework, and she was frankly embarrassed at the condition of her home. But she then did agree to let me come over. And of course, I said, I don't care about the home. I just wanted to see her. Mind you, I considered Mary Mom a Wonder Woman. She was disabled with arthritis and had not walked in the entire time I had known her, which was over 20 years. She had over time modified her home to make it livable. Uh, we siblings often referenced MacGyver when marveling over her latest clever self-made tool to help her do things that we all take for granted. She had rigged every door in the house to make it manageable to open and close. She had drilled strategically placed holes in simple wooden spoons that allowed her to use the kitchen sink, and on and on. She figured out how to sweep and mop the floor from a wheelchair. It took a while to do, and frankly, I think it would exhaust anyone to do what she did, but the fact was she found a way to do it, and she could do it. It gave her pride. It made her feel independent. So back to this visit. I arrived at her home, and I did see the decline in both the upkeep of the house and her physical appearance. Thank goodness for her neighbors, who I learned later had helped her out in so many ways. I did worry when I saw how difficult things were becoming that those neighbors would think that we children were negligent. But in the end, after meeting and talking with them, they knew Mary very well. They knew how independent she wanted to remain. I did, at this point, I have to admit that subsequent visits with her could be difficult. She wasn't her breezy self. She appeared to be suffering from so much isolation. Conversations could be awkward and sometimes a little painful. She would close her eyes through most of any conversation. And I'm not even sure she was aware she was doing it. She later admitted that she was just so exhausted all day, every day. And she had tried so many different things to change that. She changed her diet. She tried to drink more water, less water. She tried various herbs and supplements. The one thing she would not do, however, was seek medical care. As somebody who works in the medical field, I found this somewhat frustrating, but I respected boundaries. I knew there was zero sense in trying to convince her otherwise, although we did throw it out there. She was fearful that if she sought medical care, she'd be forced to leave her home by well-meaning people, and she was not willing to take that risk. And I can't say she was entirely wrong. I'm pretty sure at this point I started having conversations with siblings, raising concerns about how she was doing and what, if anything, we could do for her. It turns out that two of us had had serious discussions with her about moving in with us, but she politely declined. The day finally came when she called me. I've talked in a prior episode about how she literally never called her children out of a desire to not be intrusive. When I saw her number appear on my cell phone, my stomach sank. I said, hello, trying to mask the fear I was feeling. She said it was probably nothing, but wondered if I would be coming by anytime soon. She had been feeling weak and wondered if she might have pneumonia. She didn't have a cough, fever, or shortness of breath, but she had had pneumonia a couple of years prior and felt weak like she did now. I had the day off from work, fortunately. I picked up my stethoscope, got to her house, and then the full story emerged. She admitted that she had been sleeping in her wheelchair because she felt too weak to go to bed. At one point, she had fallen out of her wheelchair and crawled across the kitchen floor to get to the phone, which took hours. EMS arrived. She didn't call any of us. And of course, they tried to make her go to the hospital, but she refused. They had been dropping by nightly if she called them to help her get to bed. This is a service that is provided in some small towns to help keep an aging population in their homes as long as possible. I found it amazing. I met some of these folks, and it was clear that they had been trying to get her to call family. They looked so relieved when we finally arrived. The day she called me, she was too weak to get to bed or do any bathroom transfers, so she was getting a little panicked. I arrived, I helped her get refreshed, and then we talked long and hard about options. I really didn't think she had pneumonia, but I thought it was worth going to the hospital and get checked out. She had no interest in hospitals or nursing homes. Then she started opening up about how lonely she was for her late husband. She described putting on music and putting it on repeat and just thinking about him. She would just stop moving sometimes for hours. It wasn't clear. There were days where she rarely got out of bed. She was almost paralyzed at times by her longing for him. It seemed that this had gone beyond grief. Her appetite had pretty much become non-existent. It seemed almost that she had become comfortable with her grief. She was living in it, she was accepting it, and she was ready to move on. She just hadn't let any of us know this yet. It was clear that she felt the best years had passed. While she loved us all, she was ready again to move on, and she expressed that she hoped we would let her go. This was all a little heartbreaking to hear from someone I felt very connected to. But I guess even the closest connections have their limitations, especially when those involved want to protect each other. She had a definite desire to spare us her pain and not worry us, and that motivated her secrecy. But how could we not worry once we realized what her life had become? At some point, she decided to sleep on her options that we had discussed, one of which I couldn't quite wrap my head around exactly, but she said she would decide what she wanted to do by morning. I knew what she was going to choose. Really, I knew it. But by sleeping on the decision, she was giving me the night to get used to the idea. The next morning, she let me know that she was going to stop eating and drinking. She had essentially already started the process. She had read a book about this process written by the wife of a somewhat famous person whose husband decided to stop eating as a way to end his life. He had been quite disabled as well. She felt that this is how she wanted to leave this life. It gave her control, and it didn't seem like it would be difficult. I stared hard into her eyes for any hint of doubt. That moment is crystal clear to me. That doubt just wasn't there. I felt I was beginning to see life through her eyes instead of through mine. She was ready, and I told her I would support her. There's so many things about the next 3 weeks that I remember so vividly, but her next sentence is burned into my mind after I told her I would support her. She said, "You really are my daughter." And she perked up and she had a big smile on her face. She was beaming. And these are the ways that adoption just keeps pushing their way. It just keeps pushing its way into the story. For a minute, it felt like the air got sucked out of the room. Here I was assuming so much about our relationship, that we were just like any other mother-daughter talking about serious end-of-life decision-making. Did this statement mean she was questioning our connection? Thankfully, she quickly followed up by saying she never had any doubt about the fact that I am her daughter. What she was really trying to convey is how good it felt for her to be understood by me. And that was a wow moment for me. I just never considered that she might be insecure. This adoption thing can be such a damn minefield of emotions. The only thing that saved us in this relationship was having open hearts and minds and being able to talk things through. For my mom and me, we wanted to be connected, and so we were. Like any relationship, it wasn't always smooth, it wasn't always real. I'm sorry, it wasn't always easy. Good Lord, but it was real. I do recall leaving her room, pausing and going back in to tell her, "I suppose I should also tell you that I love you and prefer to have you around a lot longer, and that just because I seem so agreeable with your plan, it doesn't mean I'm happy to see you go. I mean, I don't want you to think I want my mother to die." And there's something to that effect. We both laughed really hard at that point. The thing that we didn't know needed to be said got said through that conversation. We then talked about my siblings and how she wanted to approach each of them. And while she wanted to do this all on her own with our support, I did ask for one concession, and that was to involve the services of hospice, which I knew, for comfort if nothing else, was really going to be necessary. She agreed, and thankfully, and this made the journey easier for her. Hospice actually had experience in cases like this, and I was really unaware that this is more common than we think. I will forever be grateful for their kind and compassionate support and care of not only our mother, but of we, her children, as well. Over the next 3 weeks until my mother passed peacefully, I will say, I did share a difficult, beautiful, and defining experience with my siblings and my mom. During those 3 weeks, I'd walk my dog along the dirt road in front of my mom's house, taking a break while the siblings tended to her. During these walks, I started humming a little song to myself. The words emerged out of nowhere, really. I hadn't written a song before. Well, I guess I had written one, but nothing of consequence. I started seeing things through my mom's perspective, and that's what emerged. I felt pretty lucky to be able to share the first verse of this song with my mom before she died. We were sitting on a back patio. It was towards the end of the day. I sang the verse. She whispered, "That's beautiful," smiled with her eyes closed as we sat side by side with our heads touching while holding hands. It was a quiet, very peaceful moment, and I'm so grateful to have that memory. While going through her things after she passed, I was able to write the rest of the song after finding something she wrote in one of her many scattered notebooks throughout the house. I have no way of knowing whether it was something she actually wrote or something she copied, but it so perfectly fit in. While I have no experience with songwriting, really, or with singing in public, I managed to stumble through the song at her graveside. The funeral itself is its own topic. It was astonishingly beautiful. It was a natural burial where she got to be in the shade next to her husband, who was buried before her. He was in the bright sun. And we feel she arranged her death at just the right time to allow us to bury her on their anniversary. And I guess the main point in remembering all of this all over again was to look back and reabsorb and reconnect with the gift of love that my Mary mom gave to me, and to feel the love I had for her again, her own way of living, and appreciate her own very unique story. I can see that my mother's life and story will always be intertwined with mine. In just a few short hours of working on this little essay, I can see that by writing about and thinking about losing her again, I've actually found her again. I feel like that by reconnecting to her and the past, I'll be better prepared for what's next in my story. There's been some loss of late, and I have some decision making about what's next for me. In the middle of all this loss, I decided to leave my job, which seems a little bit crazy, but it was so the right thing to do. It's time to move on. So I'm going to close by playing the song I wrote for my mother. Please keep in mind that I'm in an emotional state right now and that I'm not a professional musician. I do thank you in advance for your forgiveness. Meanwhile, big word, full of love to your mothers and to your fathers. This isn't easy for me. I close my eyes and all that I see are those who I must let go. Have I taught them all that I know, and yet I feel fine. Your heart has met mine, and the love that I've shown has been returned, so I fear nothing. I fear nothing. So grateful to have known you. You're the dew on the rose of my morning starlit sky. You're all that I know, yet I'm ready to return to the one for whom my soul is burned, and what I've become. I'm ready to move on, so please fear nothing. Please fear nothing. In my mind, a gospel choir is singing here. Mary had 4 little lambs who wrapped her in their love, and they gave her back to him on a sunny day in May, and they feared nothing. They feared nothing. And we feared nothing. Thanks for listening.